My friends, we often think of struggles as something to be avoided, something foreign to the life we were meant to live. We pray for an easy road, and when the road is hard, we assume we have taken a wrong turn. Yet, I tell you plainly, God in his wisdom rarely removes struggles. He transforms them. Imagine, if you will, a child learning to walk. If he falls, does his father rush to forbid him from ever trying again? Of course not. The father smiles, encourages, and perhaps steadies the child for another attempt. The falling is part of the walking. So it is with us. The very thing that bruises us today may be the thing that strengthens us tomorrow. We are prone to believe that a life without struggle is a life well lived. We imagine that if we were truly walking in God's favor, then surely our path would be smooth, our burdens light, and our days filled with ease. When suffering comes, we are quick to ask, "What have I done wrong? Has God turned away from me?" But this way of thinking is not only false, it is dangerous. It tempts us to believe that pain is always a sign of God's displeasure, when in fact it is often the opposite. Struggles are not mistakes. They are not interruptions to the life we were meant to live. More often than not, they are the very means by which God accomplishes his purposes in us. Imagine for a moment a blacksmith at work. Before him is a piece of raw iron, solid but unrefined. If the iron had a will of its own, it might cry out in protest as the smith thrust it into the fire. It might recoil at the hammer blows, wondering why it must endure such force, such heat, such apparent destruction. And yet, the blacksmith knows exactly what he is doing. He is not ruining the iron, he is shaping it. The fire does not burn it away, but makes it pliable, able to be molded into something strong and useful. The hammer does not crush it, but strengthens it, forging it into its intended form. What feels to the iron like punishment is, in truth, a process of transformation. So it is with us. We imagine that struggle means something has gone wrong. We assume that if we are experiencing pain, God must be displeased with us, or worse, that he has abandoned us altogether. Yet if we look to Scripture, we find quite the opposite. Time and again, God allows his children to walk through suffering, not because he has forgotten them, but because he is shaping them. Moses, exiled to the wilderness, was not forgotten but prepared. Joseph, betrayed and imprisoned, was not forsaken but positioned for a greater purpose. Even Christ himself, though perfect, was not spared from suffering. If he, the very Son of God, endured pain for the sake of glory, how much more should we expect the same? The great deception of our age is that comfort is the highest good. We have come to believe that the absence of struggle is the surest sign of blessing. But consider the strongest trees. They are not those that have grown in sheltered valleys, untouched by storm and wind. They are those that have stood against the fiercest gales, their roots driven deeper into the earth with every trial they endure. Their strength does not come from ease, but from resistance. So too our souls are strengthened not by the absence of hardship, but by the faith that withstands it. When we encounter trials, we have a choice. We can resent them, fight against them, and grow bitter, believing that we have been treated unfairly, or we can trust that God is at work in ways we cannot yet see. A child does not always understand why a loving father says no. A patient does not always grasp why the surgeon must cut before he can heal. But in both cases, what seems painful is in fact an act of love. Our struggles are not random. They are not meaningless disruptions to our comfort. They are not signs of divine neglect, but of divine care. They remind us that we are being refined, that we are not yet complete, but that God is still at work in us. And if He is at work, then even in our pain, we can trust that something good is being made of it. 2. We often ask God to take away our struggles, believing that if He truly loved us, He would remove every obstacle from our path. We think that an easier life is a better one, that the absence of hardship means the presence of His favor. And yet God, in His wisdom, rarely chooses to remove our struggles outright. Instead, He does something far greater. He transforms them. What we see as burdens, He turns into blessings. What we view as setbacks, He uses to propel us forward. He does not simply take away our difficulties. He reshapes them so that they become the very tools by which He accomplishes His will in our lives. Consider how a seed grows. Left alone, sitting on a shelf, it remains just a seed full of potential but lifeless. Only when it is buried in the soil, pressed down into the darkness, does the process of transformation begin. To the seed it must feel like an ending, like being swallowed up by the earth, but in reality it is the beginning of something new. The outer shell breaks apart, the roots push downward, and soon a sprout reaches toward the light. What seemed like destruction was actually the necessary process for life to emerge. So it is with us. When we are pressed down by struggles, when we feel buried by pain or sorrow, we must remember that God is not destroying us. He is planting us. He is preparing us for something far greater than we could have imagined. It is a curious thing that we pray for strength, but we do not wish for the trials that make us strong. We ask for wisdom, but hope to avoid the experiences that teach it. We want deep faith, but resist the very struggles that would drive us to trust God more. And so, in His mercy, God answers our prayers in ways we do not expect. Instead of removing the hardship, He walks with us through it, using it to shape us into who we were meant to be. Think of a river flowing through a valley. The water does not remain still. It moves, carving its way through rock and earth, shaping the land over time. If the river had a voice, it might protest against the obstacles in its path, the boulders, the steep cliffs, the fallen trees. And yet, it is precisely these obstacles that shape the river's course, that give it its depth and beauty. Without resistance, the river would have no character, no direction. It would simply spread out into a stagnant pool, going nowhere. So it is with our lives. The difficulties we face are not pointless obstructions. They are the very things that give our journey meaning and shape our character. Without them, we would remain shallow, untested, and weak. There is a peculiar paradox at the heart of suffering. What we see as a curse is often the very thing that prepares us for greater joy. It is easy to believe that blessings come in the form of ease and comfort, but some of the greatest gifts God gives us come wrapped in hardship. A closed door forces us to seek a new path, one we never would have chosen, but that leads to something better. A season of loneliness teaches us to depend on God in a way we never did before. A failure humbles us, making us teachable, shaping us into the kind of person who can be trusted with greater responsibility. These are not accidents. They are not evidence that God has abandoned us. They are the signs of His careful, intentional work in our lives. If we could see the full picture, if we could look back from the vantage point of eternity, we would see that the very things we once wished away were in fact the very things that made us who we are. We would see that God never wasted a single moment of our suffering. We would see that every hardship was used, every trial transformed, every struggle repurposed for something good. What we once thought was breaking us was actually making us whole. A man who has never faced hardship believes himself strong. He walks with confidence, unshaken, thinking he can bear whatever comes. But his confidence is untested, his strength unproven. It is only when he encounters struggle, when he is pressed, stretched, and brought to the end of himself, that he truly learns what he is made of. More importantly, he learns that his own strength is not enough. We do not know our own weakness until we are forced to confront it. When life is easy, we can convince ourselves that we are self-sufficient, that we are capable of handling everything on our own. But when trials come, they reveal the truth. We are not as strong as we imagined. The weight we thought we could carry alone proves too heavy, and our knees buckle under the burden. It is in this moment, when our own strength fails us, that we are given the opportunity to lean on something greater. This is one of the ways God turns struggle into blessing. He allows us to reach the end of ourselves so that we might turn to him. As long as we believe we have no need, we will not seek help. As long as we think we are strong enough, we will not call upon the one who is truly strong. It is suffering that brings us to the place of dependence, and in that place we discover something remarkable, that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. A tree standing alone in a field untouched by wind may appear tall and proud, but its roots are shallow. The first great storm that comes will tear it from the ground. But a tree that has endured many storms, that has been battered by wind and rain, is different. Each storm forces its roots to grow deeper, searching for a foundation that cannot be shaken. By the time it reaches full height, it is not easily moved. Its strength is not a result of easy days, but of many hard ones. So it is with faith. A man whose faith has never been tested may appear confident in God, but that confidence has not been proven. It is when the storm comes, when prayers seem unanswered, when suffering is prolonged, when all hope appears lost, that true faith is revealed. Some turn away, unable to believe in the goodness of God in the midst of pain, but others, though shaken, cling more tightly to him. Their roots go deeper, their trust grows stronger, and they come through the trial not with less faith, but with more. There is a mystery in suffering that cannot be understood from a distance. We often ask why God allows difficulty, why he does not remove the things that cause us pain. But those who have walked through suffering and have come out on the other side know something that cannot be explained. It is in the place of deepest need that God meets us most profoundly. It is in our lowest moments that we experience his presence most clearly. When we have nothing left, when all our strength is gone, we find that he is enough. This is why some of the strongest, most faithful people are not those who have lived easy lives, but those who have endured much and remained steadfast. Their strength is not their own, it is the strength of God working in them. They have learned through trial and hardship that they are not enough on their own, but that they do not have to be. They have been emptied of self-sufficiency, and in that emptying they have been filled with something greater. Suffering, then, is not just something to be endured, it is something through which we are transformed. It strips away the illusion of our own power and leads us to a place of deeper trust in God. It humbles us, but in that humility it prepares us for greater things. It teaches us to rely not on our own strength, but on the one whose strength never fails. And in the end, it does not leave us weaker, but stronger than we ever could have been on our own. Loss is one of the hardest things for us to accept. When something is taken from us, our health, our security, our dreams, or someone we love, it can feel as though the very foundation of our life is crumbling. We cling to what we have, believing that if we lose it, we will be left empty, unable to move forward. But what if the things we fear losing the most are not the things that truly sustain us? What if the loss itself is meant to point us towards something greater? We often assume that what we have now is essential, that the things we hold dear are the key to our happiness and purpose. But many of the things we treasure most are in truth temporary. We build our sense of security around them, we define our identity through them, and we depend on them to give our lives meaning. Yet, when they are stripped away, we come to a startling realization. They were never the foundation we thought they were. What we believed was necessary was, in many cases, only a shadow of something deeper and more lasting. There is an old story of a man who clung tightly to a bag of gold while crossing a river. As the water rose higher, the weight of the gold dragged him down. He had a choice: release what he valued most and live, or hold on and be pulled under. At that moment, what seemed precious became a burden. He did not realize it until he was drowning. So it is with us. We hold tightly to things that seem indispensable, but when life's waters rise, we often find that what we thought was saving us is actually weighing us down. God in his wisdom sometimes takes things from us, not to punish us, but to free us. He knows that if we never let go, we will never discover the greater treasure he has in store. It is painful to lose what we love, but loss often clears the way for something more enduring. We do not recognize how much we have depended on fragile things until they are gone. But when they are taken away, we are given an opportunity to turn our eyes toward what is eternal. Consider a man who has built his identity on success. His achievements define him, his reputation sustains him, and his work gives his life meaning. But one day he loses it all. The company fails, the title is gone, and he is left with nothing but himself. At first he feels as though his life is over. But as time passes, he begins to see something he never noticed before. He was never meant to be defined by these things. He is still valuable, still loved, still a man with purpose, even without them. In losing what he thought was essential, he discovers something deeper. His worth was never in his success, but in something far greater. The same is true of relationships. We love deeply, and rightly so. But when we lose someone we love, we feel as if a part of us has been torn away. Grief is real, and it is not to be dismissed. But even in loss, something remains. Love itself is not taken from us. The goodness, the lessons, the impact of that person's life do not vanish. And in the aching space left behind, we often find a deeper longing, one that no earthly relationship could ever fully satisfy. It is in our grief that we begin to see that we were made for something beyond this world, for a love that is unbreakable, for a joy that loss cannot steal. It is only when the lesser things are taken from us that we begin to long for what is greater. When we lose what is temporary, we are drawn toward what is eternal. The comforts we relied on fade, but in their place we find something far richer, a strength we did not know we had, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a joy that loss cannot diminish. We would never have chosen the pain, but in the end we see that it has led us somewhere we never could have gone otherwise. What we thought was essential may not have been. What we feared losing may not have been the foundation we believed it was. And what we once mourned as loss may, in time, reveal itself to be the very thing that pointed us toward what truly lasts. Miraculous intervention, a door flung wide open where once there was only a wall. But more often than not, God does not work this way. Instead of taking away the burden, he strengthens us to bear it. Instead of removing the storm, he gives us the ability to endure. This is a difficult truth to accept, the path because we naturally resist suffering. Stronger. We do not want to walk through pain. We want to be lifted above it. But God's grace is not always about escape. It is about transformation. And it is in the struggle itself that we often find a grace we never would have known otherwise. Think of a man wandering through a desert, weary and near collapse. He prays for rain, for an oasis, for a sudden change in the landscape that will end his suffering. But instead of rain, he is given something else. A well, deep within the earth, hidden beneath the very ground he walks on. He must dig, he must work, he must persist. But as he does, he finds that water has been there all along, waiting for him to seek it. So it is with God's grace in suffering. It is not always obvious, not always immediate, but it is there, waiting to be discovered. We often do not realize how near he is until we are forced to depend on him completely. When everything else is stripped away, when we have no strength of our own left, we finally see that he is enough. Consider those who have walked through deep suffering and yet emerged with unshaken faith. They are not those who avoided hardship, but those who met God in the midst of it. They are the ones who, like Job, have lost much, but have come to know the presence of God in a way they never had before. They have learned what Paul learned, that God's grace is sufficient, that his power is made perfect in weakness. This is a grace that does not always change circumstances, but it changes us. It softens what is hardened, humbles what is proud, strengthens what is weak. It teaches us to rely not on ourselves, but on the one who sustains us. It shows us that joy is not found in the absence of trials, but in the presence of God within them. It is in our moments of deepest pain that we often find our greatest clarity. The things that once seemed important fade into the background, the distractions of life, the trivial worries, the empty pursuits, they all lose their hold on us. We begin to see what truly matters. We begin to seek what is eternal rather than what is temporary. And in that seeking, we find that God has been there all along, offering us a peace that cannot be taken away, a hope that is not dependent on circumstances, a love that does not waver. We do not always recognize grace when we are in the middle of suffering. At the time, all we can see is the pain, the loss, the weight of the trial. But looking back, we often realize that it was in those very moments that we were closest to God. It was in those times that we learned to trust him in a way we never had before. It was then that our faith became real. Not just words, not just ideas, but a deep, unshakable reliance on the one who never leaves us. God's grace is found not in the absence of struggles, but in his presence within them. It is not always the answer we expect, but it is always the answer we need. And when we look back, we will see that even in our darkest moments, even when we thought all was lost, we were never alone. Pain has a way of narrowing our vision. When we suffer, we become consumed by the weight of our struggles, unable to see beyond the immediate hardship. We ask, why is this happening to me? And we search desperately for an escape. The difficulty feels meaningless, unfair, and overwhelming. But what if suffering is not merely something to be endured, but something that is being used for a greater purpose? What if the very trials that seem to break us are in fact shaping us into something far stronger? Throughout history, the greatest figures of faith have been those who walked through immense suffering. They were not spared hardship. Rather, they were refined by it. Their faith was not built in comfort, but in adversity. They discovered something that we often overlook. Struggle is not a sign of God's absence, but a tool in his hands. He uses it to shape us, to strengthen us, and to reveal truths we would never have seen otherwise. Imagine a blacksmith at work, heating metal in a blazing fire. The metal must be softened before it can be shaped. It must be struck again and again before it takes on the form the blacksmith intends. To the untrained eye, this might seem destructive. Fire, hammering, force. But the blacksmith knows what he is doing. He is not destroying, he is creating. Without the fire, the metal would remain brittle and useless. Without the blows of the hammer, it would never reach its full strength. So it is with us. The struggles we face are not pointless suffering. They are the fire and hammer that shape us. They reveal what is weak in us, what must be refined, what must be transformed. In our trials, we are given a choice. We can resist the process, allowing bitterness and despair to harden us, or we can yield to the work being done in us, trusting that the fire will not consume us, but will instead purify us. This is not to say that suffering is easy. There are days when the weight of it seems unbearable, when we cannot imagine any good coming from our pain. But even in those moments, something unseen is happening within us. Strength is being forged, wisdom is being gained, compassion is being cultivated. Every struggle we endure prepares us for something ahead, something we cannot yet see. Consider a person who has known deep sorrow. At first they are broken by it, struggling to make sense of their loss. But as time passes, something changes. They become more attuned to the suffering of others. They understand pain in a way they never did before, and because of that, they can comfort those who are hurting, offering words that carry weight, words born not from theory, but from experience. Their suffering has not been wasted. It has made them into a vessel of compassion, a source of strength for others. In the same way, our struggles equip us for things we cannot yet understand. They build resilience, teaching us that we can endure far more than we ever imagined. They teach us dependence, forcing us to rely not on our own strength, but on something greater. And they prepare us for future challenges, giving us the courage to face what is to come. At times we may wonder why God does not simply remove the hardship. If he loves us, why not spare us from the pain? But love does not always take the form of immediate relief. A parent does not remove every obstacle from a child's path, knowing that struggle is necessary for growth. A teacher does not make every lesson easy, understanding that challenge leads to learning. And in the same way, God does not always take away our suffering, because he knows it is shaping us into who we were meant to be. One day we will look back and see the full picture. We will see that what felt like destruction was actually transformation, that what we thought was breaking us was in fact making us whole, and we will realize that even in our darkest moments we were never alone. The fire that we feared would consume us was instead the very thing that refined us. The blows we thought would break us only made us stronger, and the struggles we once wished away turned out to be the very things that led us into the fullness of who we were created to be.